welcome to another Capital Ideas. I'm Sandy Bahan, and our guest this week is Representative Doug Miller from District 46. Welcome back.
Well, thanks, Sandy. It's nice to be here. And before we get started, I want to say congratulations to you for all the many awards that you've won this year. Quite an honor for you.
Thank you. It is. It's also very humbling. It makes you feel like you've got a lot to live up to.
That's right.
Let's talk. This is your third year in the House of Representatives.
Right. Third year, second term.
Okay. So you are now officially a sophomore.
Right.
Okay. Are you wiser?
I think to some degree I am, but I've learned that the process is so big and so complex that you learn something new every day. But I have a much better feel for, how a bill is passed into law, what the overall process of how we interact with the Senate and the governor's office. So I've learned a lot, but I still have a lot to learn.
Okay, now we were talking before we started about some of the committees that you're currently serving on, and one of them is the General Conference Committee on Appropriations.
Right, the GCCA, which that's really the committee that writes the state budget. You're not eligible to be on that as a freshman, so as a sophomore I was honored to be appointed to that. I've been appointed to the Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, so we deal with a lot of different state agencies, and one of the assignments I've been given is to help on the budget for the Department of Veterans Affairs. As you know, Norman has a almost brand new Veterans Center, and there's projects like that across the state. Also just the budget, it's $50 million or so. So it's a nice-sized state agency, but then we also deal with the Office of Juvenile Affairs, the Health Department, the Healthcare Authority. There's several other agencies that our subcommittee will look at. So I'm real excited about it.
Okay, now out of that particular area of appropriations, what will come to Norman, if any?
Well, of course, any monies that are appropriated to the Veterans Affairs office, some of that will get to Norman because we have a nice center down here. Obviously, when you talk about mental health, you're talking about Griffin, you're talking about another area would be involving the J.D. McCarty Center. So Norman has got, as you know, lots of special facilities, very, very important to the community. We employ a lot of state employees down here. And a lot of what we do indirectly will relate to the university with the Healthcare Authority and what's going on with the University Hospital right now, et cetera. So being from Cleveland County is a real privilege because we have so many things in our community that most communities don't have.
Now, your first 2 years in the House, you of course are a Republican,
right?
And therefore you are technically a member of the minority party.
Two.
You're one of the 36.
Right.
And you have a Republican governor, and there was quite a bit of contentiousness those first two sessions. Do you feel that same tension this time?
I think there's always tension just because, as I've come to find out, that the politics of being in the legislature, you never really get away from that. We have two parties. We have vocal spokespeople on both sides. I think I've said in here before that I don't look at my job really having that much to do with the partisan aspect of it. Many of the votes that we cast have nothing to do with which party you're in. They're mainly, if there's a split at all, it's generally urban versus rural. The first couple of years, I think the battle was really over the budget and how much money are we going to spend. The governor's office and the Office of State Finance took a reasoned conservative approach because we really didn't know this year what type of growth revenue we would have. For the last 5 years prior to that, every dollar of growth revenue, as you know, was earmarked for 1017. So really, it's just been the last couple of years that we've had this good problem of how do we split up the growth revenue. But to answer your question, my impression is that the leadership of the Senate and the House, as well as the governor's office, have made sure that they understand, where they're at, and I think they're wanting to go into the appropriation process with a good feel for how much money do we have and how much money are we willing to spend. There's going to be some issues involving the rainy day fund, which typically that's a battleground that we differ on in terms of how much should we take out of there. But I'm hopeful that we're not going to see a string of vetoes like we did last year. I think we all know how much money we have, and now the tough part is just figuring out who's going to get it, because the requests always are greater than the monies available.
How much of a nuisance vector is the airplane flap?
Well, the airplane flap now has been going on for 4 months. The charge initially was to look at general aircraft policy of the state. The state owns 63 different airplanes, including the governor's. And in my opinion, what we've got here is a committee that's really decided to look at one airplane, the use of one airplane, and frankly, because we're spending taxpayers' dollars on it, the leadership has hired Susan Loving's law firm, former Attorney General, and so in my opinion, it's time to fish or cut bait. I mean, we've had 4 months to look at it. To date, I haven't seen anything that indicates there was wrongdoing. I think generally citizens would be up in arms if they knew how much taxpayers' dollars we're spending on this. And so I feel like that the investigation needs to conclude and either charges filed if there's wrongdoing. If not, we need to get busy about the business of writing a $4.3 billion state budget, $4.3 billion. And we have leadership from both houses that are involved in this, spending a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money. So in my opinion, it's time to come up with some factual findings and then move on.
Okay. Now you said there are something like $250 million that's been given to the Appropriations Committee
Right.
in terms of new growth revenue.
Right. The estimates now, I believe, are up around $300 million of new money that we're going to have available. The numbers I saw yesterday, Sandy, that have already been allocated to GCCA are $252 million, and of that, $165 million has been allocated to the committee that's going to deal with education. So there's a lot of money, new money, that's going to end up going to education this year. The subcommittee I serve on, Health and Human Services, our allocation is roughly $40 million. So my feel is that some of the money has been held back probably to address whatever road program comes out of the conference committee, and also some of that may be there for the university hospital situation, depending on how that negotiation ends up with Columbia.
The crime bill that was signed this week, the Truth in Sentencing bill, how the monies that are needed in order to make all of that work, is that included in that $252 million?
We had a supplemental appropriation earlier in the session that went to the Department of Corrections just to take care of the immediate needs. The Truth in Sentencing bill, House Bill 1213, will not be effective until July 1st of 1998, so we have a little bit more than a year to iron out the bugs. What was called for in the bill was 600 additional public beds, and 400 of those will be down in Lexington between the two prisons, 1,500 private beds. So over the next 10 years, I think the number I saw was about $500 million is what it's going to take to fund the extra beds, as well as the community corrections piece of this, which is going to involve our county jails and some of the local law enforcement. So I don't think it's going to be a tremendously big hit on the budget this year, but when we compare to the alternative that we've been doing the past few years, I think it makes sense. And the bill passed unanimously out of both houses. It was signed by the governor. There are some problems with it in terms of some of the sentencing that can be done. So what we've been told is there will be some trailer legislation follow-up to try to clean up some of the language. One of the big changes that I noticed was that now juries will not be able to hand out sentences. That will be done strictly by the judge, unless it's a capital case. If it's a murder case, then the jury will still hand down the sentence like they do now. The good part about that, in my opinion, is that currently a jury is not privy to information like, what's this person's prior record, how many prior felony convictions do they have, etc. The judge will have all that information. So I think truth in sentencing will begin to happen, where the entire record is taken into account, and we'll end up having violent offenders serve a longer sentence.
Let's talk about, like Cleveland County, for example. Can it handle the community corrections part of this?
I think so. There's obviously going to have to be some dollars spent to either expand county jails or provide some new beds. I saw just this week in Oklahoma County, because their city jail is in such bad shape, I think they are working out an arrangement with the county to house inmates, both city and county, in that jail. Cleveland County, we don't really have any inmates, in the city jail, but certainly the county jail does. So, to the best of my knowledge, before this bill was passed, all facets of law enforcement, including the District Attorney's Council and the Sheriff's Association, they looked at the legislation, and as I said, I don't think it's without problem. I think there are some concerns, but overall, I think that your local and county law enforcement people have bought off on the idea. The community correction bill that was presented last year, not part of Truth in Sentencing, but that bill was adamantly opposed by your local county sheriffs because of the burden it would have put on their jail. But I think this year, for the most part, everybody's on the same page, and as long as we can provide the funding at the county and state level, and I think this is going to be a good deal for everybody, except the convicts.
Well, that's the whole point.
That's right, exactly.
On the juvenile end of it, you're on a subcommittee that deals with juvenile crime. Where do the juveniles fit into all of this? Has their definition changed? Will they now be treated in a different fashion as they go through the system?
Well, I think one of the things that they're wanting to do this year, the Office of Juvenile Affairs has requested $14 million to help implement what's called the Youthful Offender Act, which was put into place a year ago. And part of what they've got to have is money for additional beds. As you know, we don't have very many juvenile beds in the state. And part of what the Youthful Offender Act will do is it will allow law enforcement to transfer juveniles into the adult system if they need to. And it also has a lot to do with early intervention. You also may be aware, in Norman, for example, we now have a crisis intervention center, which is going to allow local law enforcement, if they have a juvenile, typically that they would pick up, take to the jail, or maybe sit in their car for 5 hours. We now have a place that we can take that individual. Mom and dad have to come and get them. They can only be there 24 hours. But I think that's another aspect of early intervention on law enforcement that will help curb the problem that we're having with juveniles. The ones that have repeatedly gotten in trouble, those folks now are going to be in a situation where they can get sent to the adult population where there's a little more accountability and a little bit higher price to pay for what they've done.
Let's talk about that from a philosophical point for just a moment. Of course, the educators are saying that that the money ought to be put on the front end in education and prevention and all of those kinds of things that would hopefully steer a youth away from that kind of behavior. Does the legislature buy into that philosophy, or are they still coming at it from the standpoint of what seems to be a lot of the community, that just anger and let's punish these people and sort of after the fact let's get them?
Well, I think that when we're dealing with juvenile crime or just crime in general, we have to have a multifaceted approach. I think anything we can do on the front end in terms of education and intervention is critical, but we also, I think all of us know that we've got to do things to strengthen the environment that these kids are coming out of, and that gets back to the home and what we've seen in the breakdown of the home. But obviously things that we can do to help steer somebody away from a life of crime are critical. I think there are people out here that it doesn't matter what we do for them. We've got some people that are going to end up making wrong choices, and then down the road they're going to have to pay the consequences for those choices. But for example, another issue right now that we're talking about that I happen to be on the committee that's going to look at that is a $10 million appropriation that would go to help in child abuse. Now we have a lot of duplication. We have many state agencies that deal with child abuse, and we have part of our education system, hopefully is dealing with child abuse. This is money that would be funneled through the Department of Health and would work hand in hand with our area prevention centers. There's one here, there's one in Purcell, they're all over. And the goal there is to try to help early on with families preventing child abuse. So it's a similar philosophy that I think we need to be doing in education too, which is the earlier that we can get some of these people help, the better. But I think we've got to look at both, what we can do now, and then unfortunately for those people that do make wrong decisions, we've got to make sure we have a system in place, because the general public, no question, wants the truly dangerous people off the street. That's what the Truth in Sentencing bill will do. But on the other hand, I think all of us would say that the more we can do up front, the better educated we can get our kids, the less likely they are to make bad choices.
Okay, very good. We'll be back in just a moment with two students from Central Mid High School. Our student guests this week are Rick Bost and Amanda Bittle, and I think, Rick, you get the honor of asking Representative Miller the first question.
Yes, Mr. Miller. What made you decide to be a state representative in the first place?
Well, Rick, I think I've said in here before, I didn't have much of a background in student government. I wasn't involved in student council in high school or college, but I had some people come and talk to me about running back in 1994, and began to kind of check into current state representative's voting record and just kind of what he stood for, and felt like this was something that I had time to do, and I didn't know exactly how hard campaigning was going to be, but I just felt like it was my turn to get involved, and I have a small business, so I was concerned about increasing government regulations, both federal and state, in my business, and I also have a family, a wife and two boys, and so I guess I just felt like it was my turn to get involved in the process and see what I could do to help the state.
Yeah.
In what ways do you think a person's background affects or determines their career choice?
Oh, Amanda, I think that's real crucial to what you end up wanting to do. Like, for example, you know, if your mom or dad did a certain thing as a job or made a living a certain way, you may be inclined to do that. I think the way you're brought up helps instill the values that you have, and so I think that your home life and your background and your school friends all help influence that. But ultimately, it's probably what you want to do. My dad, for example, growing up was an orthodontist. I have a brother who was a doctor who always wanted to be a doctor. So when I got to be in college, everybody was looking at me saying, "Well, Doug, what do you want to do?" And so I didn't want to be a doctor, and so I chose to just go into private business. But I think to answer your question is that it's a combination of the values that your family gives you and the things that you learn as a youngster.
What are your opinions on Governor Keating and how he runs office?
I like the governor. We're of the same party. I think Governor Keating's done a very good job. I don't agree with every single thing the governor says, but you know, the governor's had a wide variety of things he's done in government. He served under President Reagan and President Bush. He has a law enforcement background, was in the FBI, and so I like that part of the governor because I think he's done well in terms of things that affect law enforcement and crime, and he's a very intelligent man, and I think he's a strong leader. You know, not everybody agrees with him, but I think he's doing a fine job, and I'm proud to serve with him. We got elected the same time, 1994.
Do you ever feel pressure to conform your values to the mold stereotypical of Republican politicians?
What would be a stereotypical view of a Republican first?
Right-wing, conservative?
Right-wing, no. Conservative, yes. In the House, for example, we have 36 Republicans, and anytime you put that many people together, you're going to have all different types. But when I ran, Amanda, I ran on a pro-business, smaller government, pro-education platform, and I would say that's primarily what I believe. many times, I vote with a lot of Democrats. Sometimes I vote against a lot of Republicans. It kind of depends on what the issue is. My district's very diverse. I have part of Norman, so I have the school system and the university, but then my district also goes down to the rural part of McLean County. Like I have Dibble, Slaughterville, Blanchard, some smaller towns, and their issues are a lot different than the people that live in Norman. So in terms of conforming to a stereotype, I don't think I do. I think I try to look at what's best for my district, what's best for the state, and vote that way. And many times, on any given issue, you're going to have people for it and people against it.
So that brings me to my question. Do you agree with Democrats on most of the issues, or do you just not agree with them at all?
Well, similar answer. I think by and large, we agree, Democrat and Republican agree on 90% of what we do. We all want to see things that are going to be beneficial to the state. I share the district just south of mine with a Democrat, Billy Mitchell from Lindsay, who's been in the legislature a long time. And just south of there, from Sulphur, is a fellow named Danny Hilliard, also a Democrat. And I would say our districts are very similar, and so our values are very similar. So on many issues, I may go to Billy Mitchell and ask him what he thinks, if this is good or bad for our districts, because we share parts of McLean County. I share Cleveland County with Laura Boyd, Wallace Collins, and some Republicans like Joan Greenwood, Carolyn Coleman, Danny Webb, Tim Pope. So by and large, I would say we usually agree on major issues that are going to be good for the state. Unfortunately, what the press likes to talk about and what campaigns are based upon are the differences that you have, which are, again, I think, definitely in the minority.
When you get a situation, though, like last spring where the governor vetoed some legislation and the Republican bloc, if you will, supported that veto for whatever reasons they supported, do you have to then come back to your district, and did you have to do some quote-unquote explaining?
Well, not really. I mean, at that point, when you start talking about a veto, that's where our strength as the minority party lies. I mean, we have the ability in the House of Representatives to sustain the governor's veto. And last year, I think on 8 different occasions, the Democratic leadership tried to override something that the governor had vetoed, and we were able to sustain the veto. So at that point, it really becomes a chess game, and it really becomes our strength is to stand behind the governor and make his veto stick. The request that I've had of the governor's office is, if there's a bill, for example, that you think needs to be vetoed for whatever reason, we want to make sure that we have good lines of communication so we kind of know what the executive branch is thinking, because what we don't want to do is not know what they're thinking and then get stuck in a situation where something gets vetoed that we really didn't know it was going to get vetoed. So when we start talking about vetoes, that's when typically the partisan aspect of this comes in. I mean, most of the Republicans are going to vote to sustain the veto, where the Democrats are going to vote to override the veto. And what they're trying to do is chip away at the power of the governor. What the governor's trying to do is play a card that he has in his hand and make it stick.
But what I hear you saying is that that's really the one time that the bloc votes as a bloc.
I would say strategy-wise, it's very critical that the Republicans, hang together, and that if the governor, who's the leader of the executive branch, says this bill needs to be vetoed, it's not that we just blindly uphold his veto, but I think it's critical that we show unity and that we show our support for the governor. It's just like there's certain times that if the leadership, the Democratic leadership, the Speaker of the House, if they have an issue that they want done that is a very important issue to them, I guarantee you're not going to see any Democrats vote against that. That's just kind of part of how the partisan part of being in the legislature plays out. But when you're the minority party, you look for things that you can do to make a difference. And because of that, because we have enough members now to sustain the veto, I would say that we have a little more balance. We have more of a two-party system than we have in the past. And frankly, I think the winners there are the citizens, because you tend to have both sides represented, and sometimes you forge a compromise that may be better for the state and the people of the state.
Amanda?
Do you feel that the Bible should have a say in state law?
Well, many of our laws, Amanda, would be based upon biblical principles. Like, for example, if you assume the Bible's true, and if you assume that God is real, which I believe, both of those, then you have a basis for saying that certain laws are based on the Bible. Capital punishment, would be one. If you take the Ten Commandments and you look at those and you transfer those over to what most civil, countries or civil law has in their statutes, it's very similar. So, without getting into separation of church and state and what's proper and what's not, I would say that there's definitely a basis for civil and criminal law that would go all the way back to the Bible.
So, but you don't think that it should be a valid argument to pass a bill that the Bible says it just by itself? If the
Well,
Bible
I think if something is true to a biblical principle or a biblical law, I think it's a very good argument for the bill. Without a specific case, it'd be hard to comment on there. But I would very much believe that our laws and what we try to do today has some correlation to what's in the Bible.
Just what would be a typical day for you as a state representative?
Well, lately they've been pretty busy. We all serve on different committees, so we may have committee meetings during the day. At this point, as Sandy mentioned earlier, I'm serving on the GCCA committee, which helps write the state budget. So over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have many meetings dealing with the state budget. And then every day we go into session for some length of time. The past week, we weren't on the floor very much because for the past 3 or 4 weeks, we've been hearing Senate bills, and we've heard most of the Senate bills. So we're kind of getting down to the home stretch. And then as bills come out of conference committee, which is a joint committee that has Senate members and House members, as those bills start coming back out, then we'll be on the floor more to actually vote on the bills. And then as the appropriation process winds down, we'll be out there voting on appropriation bills. But typically, a day at the Capitol involves committee meetings, voting on bills, and then just handling correspondence. We each represent a district in the House of about 35,000 people, so we may get phone calls from different people voicing an opinion on a bill. They may have a problem. They may want me to check into something, and so it's a fast pace.
Okay. In your opinion, what is the most pressing problem facing modern American teens?
Well, I think today's teenagers, you live in a much more complex world than I did, just growing up, and I'm not that old. But I think the challenges are immense to know, how to effectively deal with peer pressure. The drug and alcohol problem is worse now than it was when I was a student. The breakdown of the family is worse. We have lots of people that come out of dysfunctional homes that maybe don't have a mom or a dad, and so all that presents bigger challenges for you all. The whole issue of teen pregnancy is paramount, and so one of the things Sandy and I talked about was things we can do to help at an early stage, things that we can do to help intervene with troubled youth. So I don't know that I could say what the greatest challenge is, but I think the greatest challenge would be at an early age to figure out what you believe and what principles you're going to live your life by, and then make sure that you've got accountability there to stay true to your beliefs.
Hey, we're out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You've got
I enjoyed
another
it.
month to go. Hope
Right.
things will come out the way everybody wants them to come out. And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.